So you're here because you want to understand the world a little better, maybe a little faster.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're diving deep into something that, well, it shapes our lives in these profound, often unseen ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
How the design of our cities actually impacts our happiness.
It's huge.
Think about it, your neighborhood streets, the layout of your town, the buildings you see every single day.
Right. Christopher Alexander had that quote, didn't he?
Yeah.
About inner harmony depending on harmony with our surroundings.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. And this isn't just, about whether a place looks pretty.
Not at all.
Our mission today is to really unpack how urban design affects our well-being. We've looked at, well, everything from urban planning analyses, sociological studies.
Economic surveys, too.
Yeah, economic surveys to bring you the sort of core insights.
And some of these insights are genuinely surprising, I think.
Oh, definitely.
We're going to explore why that whole sprawling suburban model might be reaching its limits. We'll take a look at some early, maybe kind of flawed ideas about the ideal happy city.
Historical stuff, yeah.
And get into what the science of happiness actually tells us matters most.
Right.
We'll even touch on why that daily commute might be, well, chipping away at your happiness more than you realize.
Okay, let's get into it.
So one of the big shifts underlying all this is it's the end of what you could call cheap, right?
Yeah. Cheap energy, cheap land, cheap material.
All the stuff that made that widespread suburbanization possible.
Yes, just becoming scarce now.
Mm-hmm.
Resource depletion and, the huge contribution of cities to climate change. It's forcing us to rethink how we live.
Right. That dispersed, car-dependent city,
Yeah.
It's just not sustainable long term.
No way.
And this brings us to an interesting idea. The happy city theory. It suggests that a more concentrated, well-designed urban environment could actually lead to, well, greater happiness.
Look at Bogotá, for instance, a city that, despite its challenges, really tried to reshape itself with people in mind.
It's fascinating, though, how different that is from some of the earlier ideas about happy cities.
Oh, completely different. Think back to the early 20th century. Someone like Le Corbusier.
Ah, yes.
His concept was all about geometric order, wasn't it? And strictly separating different functions in the city.
The radiant city.
Yeah.
Everything neatly zoned, living here, industry over there, shopping in its own little box.
Exactly. His big plan for Paris, it never fully happened.
Thankfully, maybe.
Well, maybe. But his ideas definitely had an impact, especially on, socialist governments in Europe trying to build a new social order.
But the key insight here, I suppose, is that rigidly separating city functions like he envisioned, it doesn't actually lead to happier lives.
No, because it kills all those spontaneous social interactions that are so vital.
Right. And it's interesting to contrast that really structured approach with that other early idea, the school of speed.
Yeah, the idea that happiness was basically about escaping the city fast.
Freedom meant getting away from urban density above all else.
So the takeaway from that early thinking is that just escaping the city doesn't guarantee happiness either, does it?
No, it completely neglects the social stuff, the community aspects that matter.
So you have these almost opposite ideas, both trying for a better life, but with totally different city layouts in mind.
Which brings us to a really crucial question. How do we even measure this thing we call happiness?
Good question.
It's not just about feeling cheerful for a moment, is it?
Not at all. The field of happiness economics, it's moved beyond just measuring momentary affect, how people feel right now.
Right.
The focus now is more on overall life satisfaction, what the ancient Greeks called eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia, a life well lived.
Exactly. And surveys like the World Values Survey, looking at values and beliefs across countries, and the Gallup World Poll. Those are key tools for assessing this broader sense of well-being.
So they're trying to, quantify it, put a number on eudaimonia.
Pretty much, yeah.
And by doing that, they can start comparing it with different factors in our lives. Income, commute time, all that stuff.
Precisely. And what these surveys consistently show, again and again, is the absolute paramount importance of social connection.
Ah, the social connection piece.
Yeah, the work of economist John Helliwell is central here. He spent decades on this.
He jokes about being Aristotle's research assistant, right?
He does. Because he emphasizes that our relationships are just fundamental for us as individuals and for the health of our societies.
And his findings from the World Values Survey are really striking.
They are.
Just having someone you can count on in tough times, that has a bigger effect on your life satisfaction than getting a big raise.
It often does, yeah. The key insight is that strong social support is a massive driver of happiness, often way more than material wealth.
And it's not just our closest friends and family, is it?
No, it's also about trust. Trust in your neighbors, trust in local government, even trust in strangers.
That level of trust has a huge influence on happiness, again, often outweighing income.
It really does. It highlights that a trusting social environment contributes massively to overall well-being.
The lost wallet test really brings that home.
Yeah, that thought experiment. Your gut feeling about whether a lost wallet would be returned.
Tells you a lot about the social fabric, the social capital.
It's a simple but powerful indicator.
Mm.
And the flip side, the lack of social connection. The implications are pretty serious.
Yeah, research links social isolation to higher rates of serious mental health issues.
It's not just feeling a bit lonely.
Mm.
The takeaway is that social isolation isn't just unpleasant. It's a real threat to our mental health.
Exactly. It's a significant risk factor, maybe even more damaging than things we worry about more often, like noise or air pollution.
And on the positive side, strong social networks act as this vital buffer.
Mm-hmm.
They can actually reduce our chances of getting sick, everything from colds to heart attacks. They contribute to better sleep, even a longer life.
So strong social connections aren't just about happiness. They're crucial for our physical health, too.
Absolutely critical.
So if social connection is this fundamental thing for happiness and well-being, how does the way we actually design our cities help or hinder those connections?
Right. This is where the impact of sprawl becomes really clear.
Okay.
The design of those car-dependent, monofunctional neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It actively contributes to shrinking our social support networks.
So.
You see lower levels of trust, less interaction with neighbors, less participation in civic life, things like that.
The key insight seems to be that sprawl, just by its very nature, isolates people and weakens those social bonds.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense, right?
Oh.
If you're spending hours commuting,
Comedian.
and living in a place where everything's spread out and you have to drive everywhere, those chances for, bumping into people, spontaneous interactions with your community,
Yeah.
they just vanish.
I remember reading about that Swedish study linking longer commutes to a higher risk of divorce.
Yeah, that's a stark illustration of how the stresses of sprawl can hit even our closest relationships.
Oh.
And Stephen Farber's research on social interaction potential, it really puts numbers on this.
How so?
His work demonstrates how the physical form of a city directly affects our ability to connect with others in meaningful ways.
So the physical layout, the street patterns, the distances, it has a direct, measurable impact on our social lives.
Definitely.
It feels like the sprawl we've built. It wasn't inevitable, was it? It feels like a deliberate choice driven by certain ideas about happiness.
Exactly. The dispersed city isn't some natural phenomenon.
No.
It's a product of financial incentives, public investment, regulations, all shaped by these philosophies about urban happiness that grew out of the problems of the industrial city.
Right, the reaction to the pollution, the overcrowding, the lack of green space back then.
Precisely. Those ideas were meant as solutions, ways to escape the downsides of the dense industrial city.
So what were the main principles driving that shift towards sprawl?
There were basically two dominant schools of thought, you could say. One prioritized strict functional segregation. The idea that separating everything living, working, shopping would eliminate the toxicity of the old mixed-use city.
Get rid of the messiness.
Kind of. And the other was that school of speed we mentioned, equating freedom and happiness with being able to quickly escape the city limits.
Right. But these philosophies, even if they were well-intentioned, they seem to have overlooked the importance of community and social interaction.
They really did. And while sprawl offered some apparent benefits, bigger houses, private yards.
The suburban dream.
Yeah. It seems like it just relocated the problems rather than actually solving them.
How do you mean?
Well, it kind of offloaded the negative stuff, pollution, perceived danger, onto the denser urban areas left behind.
Ah, right.
And paradoxically, the financial burden of building and maintaining all that infrastructure for distant sprawl often led to a decline in the quality of life and social connection, even for people still living in the central cities.
So it was a diffusion of problems, not an elimination.
Pretty much an unintended consequence.
Which brings us back to the daily reality for so many people. Commuting.
The daily grind.
We see it as a necessary evil, but it has this surprisingly big impact on our happiness, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Daniel Gilbert's work on adaptation helps explain why.
How so?
We tend to adapt to constant things, even positive ones like getting a bigger house. Our happiness level kind of resets.
Right, hedonic adaptation.
Exactly. But commuting,
Yeah.
it's often a daily dose of unpredictable stress. Different traffic jams, unexpected delays, constant frustration.
Things you can't control.
Right. And we just don't adapt well to that kind of variability. The key insight is that the unpredictable nature of commuting makes it a persistent source of unhappiness.
And the data backs this up.
Oh, yeah. The longer people commute, generally, the less satisfied they are with their lives overall.
It suggests we're not always making the most rational choices about where we live and how we get around. It's like we underestimate the daily toll of that drive.
That's the commuting paradox. Systematically failing to make choices that would actually maximize our well-being.
Why do we do that?
Well, it highlights the difference between extrinsic motivators, focused on the destination, like the bigger house,
The payoff at the end.
and intrinsic motivators, which are about the journey itself, feeling connected, competent, autonomous.
Things that bring lasting happiness.
Exactly. And those intrinsic things are often undermined by a long, stressful commute. So we often prioritize the destination over the quality of the journey, unfortunately.
It seems we're often just bad at predicting what will actually make us happy.
We really are.
We tend to overvalue those extrinsic things, like the big house, and undervalue stuff like social connection or just a pleasant daily experience. Why do we get it so wrong?
It's a good question. That Harvard dorm study is a classic illustration.
Tell me about that.
Freshmen thought the aesthetics, the look and size of certain dorms would be the biggest factor in their happiness.
Makes sense on the surface.
But it turned out the social dynamics within the dorm the community feel were far more important for their actual happiness. They completely misjudged what would really matter.
So we focus on the tangible, visible stuff over the less obvious but maybe more impactful social elements.
Exactly. And it's not just students making these miscalculations. Architects, for instance.
The people designing these places.
Right. They can develop a very different aesthetic sense than the general public, sometimes prioritizing form and abstract design principles over how a building or space actually feels and functions for the people using it every day.
David Halpern's research showed that, didn't it? Architectural training can actually change your aesthetic preferences.
It can,
Yeah.
sometimes leading to designs that the public just doesn't connect with as much.
In that anecdote about the huge, often empty suburban house,
Oh, yeah.
it symbolizes that disconnect, right?
Mm.
Between the desired image of a happy, bustling home and the reality of social isolation that can sometimes come with it.
It really does. It shows how our aesthetic ideals can sometimes clash with our actual social needs.
So it's not just our own flawed judgment messing things up. The people shaping our cities, the planners, engineers, politicians, they're also making decisions based on their own values and can fall prey to similar cognitive biases.
Exactly. That tendency to simplify really complex problems can have these unintended negative consequences.
Like with road design.
Yeah, take road design. Removing pedestrians, widening lanes to increase car speed. It seems illogical for traffic flow, right?
They're faster commutes.
But it's actually made roads more dangerous, especially for pedestrians, because the drivers tend to adjust their speed based on how safe they feel. Wider, emptier roads, people drive faster.
And higher speeds mean more severe accidents, especially for people outside cars.
Tragically, yes, it's counterintuitive, but designing purely for speed can inadvertently create a more dangerous environment for everyone else.
And even when people try to do good things, like tackling climate change in cities.
Even then, those efforts can sometimes fall short. Because of the inherent complexity and momentum of urban systems, what some call the autopoiesis of urban systems. Yeah, basically the idea that cities have their own internal logic and can be resistant to change, even well-meaning change. Plus, our own imperfect understanding of these complex systems doesn't help.
It feels like we also need to fundamentally rethink our relationship with nature in cities.
Absolutely.
It's not just about having a few big parks way out on the edge.
No, not at all. It's about the quality, the accessibility, and the integration of nature into our daily lives.
Small doses of nature, right? Experienced regularly.
Exactly. Proximity is key. If you don't see it easily, if you can't access it easily, that distant park doesn't give you the same benefits as a small green space you walk past every day.
So the key is that everyday exposure, even small amounts, positively impacts our mental health.
Definitely. We need nature at all scales. The big destination parks are great.
The XL parks.
Right. But we also need the pocket parks, the tree-lined streets, green roofs, even those living walls you see sometimes. It's about weaving nature into the urban fabric.
And actually doing things with nature, like gardening.
Yes. Actively engaging with nature, tending a community garden, Even just caring for plants on a balcony seems to have even greater benefits for health and happiness than just passively looking at it.
Fosters a sense of connection, accomplishment, maybe.
I think so.
It seems like the way we've designed cities, often focusing on private space and car travel, has also chipped away at those casual, spontaneous social interactions.
For sure. Retreating from urban interactions, whether moving far out or just isolating ourselves in our homes, can deprive us of valuable weak ties.
Weak ties, you mean like acquaintances?
Yeah, relationships with acquaintances, the barista you see every day, the familiar faces on your commute, those lighter relationships.
And Peggy Thoit's research showed these actually matter.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Yeah.
They can boost our self-esteem, our sense of mastery, even our physical health. They provide a different kind of social support than our close friends and family.
So the insight is that even casual acquaintances play a significant role in our well-being. Who knew?
It all comes back to how interconnected everything is, doesn't it?
Trust, belonging, social time, happiness.
They all tend to rise and fall together, which suggests that designing cities just around the nuclear family, for example, was probably a mistake.
Right.
Even that high-density vertical living in some cities. It's not a magic bullet for happiness if it doesn't also foster opportunities for connection. We need to think about the whole social ecosystem.
So how do we start to rebuild that balance? To rehumanize our urban spaces and create environments that actually foster these crucial connections?
Well, the work of urban designer Jan Gehl is incredibly insightful here.
The Copenhagen guy.
That's him. He shifted the focus from just the physical form and efficiency
The engineering side.
to actually studying how people use urban spaces in real life. His observations in Copenhagen, for example.
What did he find?
He showed how pedestrianizing streets and strategically placing benches, especially benches facing the pedestrian flow, encouraged social interaction. And surprisingly, it boosted local businesses, too.
So designing for people's actual behavior, not just abstract ideas, leads to more livable social cities.
That's the core takeaway, creating what he calls convivialities.
Conviviality.
Yeah, those small-scale public spaces and design elements that naturally encourage positive social interactions.
And there's a biological reason for this too, right? With oxytocin.
Exactly. Neuroscientist Paul Zach's research on oxytocin, the trust hormone, gives us a biological understanding of why these connections feel so good and are so important to us.
But the way most cities are designed now, dominated by cars.
Right. That dominant car-centric design has essentially traded that human-scale conviviality for the perceived convenience of high-speed private car travel.
And often at the expense of people living in central cities whose streets are their main public spaces.
It's been an unfair trade-off with significant social costs.
Downtown LA comes to mind. All those parking lots, the often empty streets outside of work hours.
A stark example. It shows how prioritizing cars can just kill street life and those spontaneous encounters that make cities feel alive. People drive to a building, park underneath, and never really engage with the street.
Donald Shoup pointed that out, didn't he?
He did. Contrast that with somewhere like Vauban in Germany.
The Carlight neighborhood.
Right. Deliberately designed to be mostly car-free, prioritizing pedestrians, limiting parking, and the result is lively, safe, highly social streets. It shows that prioritizing people over cars really can create vibrant communities.
It's interesting, though, our own relationship with driving is complex.
It is.
There is a certain pleasure in it sometimes, that feeling of freedom, control, maybe status.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a hedonic utility for some, especially maybe young men driving powerful cars. Some research suggests a testosterone boost even.
Ah, really?
Apparently. But for the vast majority of commuters, the daily reality of traffic jams, stress, wasted time, it probably cancels out those good feelings pretty quickly.
The daily grind outweighs the occasional thrill.
I think so.
On the other hand, people who use active transport, walking, cycling.
They consistently report more enjoyment and easier trip, even in cities that aren't super bike-friendly like New York.
And in places like the Netherlands, with amazing cycling infrastructure.
Even better. The findings there show just how much joy and how few negative emotions are linked to cycling when it's made safe and convenient.
So investing in that infrastructure has real well-being benefits.
Huge positive returns, yeah.
Robert Thayer's research even compared walking to a drug, right? Mood-boosting effects?
Like a mild antidepressant, yeah. It just underscores that powerful link between moving our bodies and our mental state.
And the actual street layout matters hugely, too.
Crucial. Those dendritic, tree-like road systems you see in a lot of sprawl.
The cul-de-sacs.
Yeah. They significantly increase distances between places and actively discourage walking or biking.
Whereas the more interconnected street grids, like in older neighborhoods,
They naturally encourage walking and biking, reduce reliance on cars for short trips.
you can see the impact in how far people live from, say, a grocery store in newer versus older areas.
Absolutely. The distances just keep increasing. Even big tech companies trying to design campuses for connection. They can't fully overcome the barrier of physical distance created by the surrounding sprawl.
And we can't forget the hidden subsidies propping up sprawl.
No, that's a huge piece. Public spending on transport infrastructure. It disproportionately benefits wealthier people and car users.
While walking and cycling infrastructure, which is often way cheaper.
Way cheaper to build and maintain.
Yeah.
It tends to be underfunded.
Mhm.
So, in effect, pedestrians and cyclists are subsidizing drivers through their taxes.
And when you add up all the costs, healthcare from inactivity and pollution, economic costs of congestion, accidents,
The overall financial burden of the dispersed city is just enormous.
it keeps coming back to how everything's connected in cities. Design choices ripple out everywhere.
Precisely. Sprawl might have fueled some economic growth initially, but it creates these huge long-term financial burdens for families and governments.
Yeah.
It's all tied together: land use, energy, carbon emissions, infrastructure costs.
The geography of the foreclosure crisis showed some of that vulnerability, didn't it?
A very stark illustration of those interconnected risks. Yeah.
So what's the alternative path? Investing in density in our downtowns.
That seems to be a key part of the solution. Joe Meticazzi, the urban planner,
What's his argument?
he argues that subsidizing more sprawl is like fertilizing weeds when you should be tending the valuable plants, which are often in the more compact downtown areas that generate more tax revenue per acre.
Interesting analogy.
Asheville, North Carolina is a good example of reinvesting downtown. They changed zoning, improved streets for walking, reduced parking requirements, built user-pay garages,
And it worked.
led to significant economic revitalization. Yeah.
It often takes a vision, though, doesn't it? Believing change is possible even when looking at, say, a giant parking lot.
Absolutely. That story of architects sketching a walkable town square right there in the middle of a parking lot, it's a powerful reminder of the potential for transformation.
And this idea of sprawl repair, like at Lakewood Town Center,
Right.
it's more than just making things look nicer.
Much more. It's about fundamentally addressing the systemic problems, mixing uses, improving walkability, creating real public spaces where people connect, not just cosmetic fixes.
And it seems people actually want this kind of neighborhood.
There's real unmet demand. Lots of Americans are willing to live in, say, an attached home if it means access to a vibrant, walkable, older-style neighborhood.
The market is showing that.
Yeah, look at the Washington, D.C. area. Walkable urban neighborhoods now have significantly higher prices per square foot than the big sprawling suburbs. Demand is strong.
But even with demand, there are often hurdles, right? Legal, systemic barriers.
Huge ones. Existing zoning codes, road standards, they often actively prevent the kind of mixed-use, walkable development we're talking about. They mandate segregation and car-centric design.
Like in Mableton, Georgia, where simple fixes for walkability were actually illegal.
Exactly. It shows how entrenched these old planning ideas are. Outdated regulations blocking common sense improvements.
We do see attempts to recreate that feeling with neo-traditional design, like Smyrna's Market Village. They look like old town squares.
And they can be very successful commercially, tapping into that nostalgia for a walkable past.
But do they fix the underlying sprawl problems?
That's the question. While they're often appealing aesthetically, they need to genuinely address the systemic issues, connectivity, real mix of uses, otherwise they risk being just isolated islands of walkability.
And sometimes there's pushback against these smart growth ideas.
Oh yeah, definitely. Backlash, even from some conservatives, sometimes fueled by misinformation, fear of change, fear of density.
Like that defeated light rail vote in Tampa.
A classic example. Exaggerated fears about what it would mean, derailing a potentially beneficial project through misperceptions.
But the fight for walkability is also happening from the ground up.
It is. Like that story of Adam Marino, the boy banned from biking to school.
Right, because it was seen as too dangerous in his suburb.
Exactly. But the community fought back and eventually got the policy changed. It highlights those shifting norms and perceptions.
And just the sheer sensory assault of car-dominated places.
Elena Parstek's experience with the constant car honking in Brooklyn.
Ah,
It's a potent reminder of the negative emotional, even physiological impact of noise pollution and just the constant stress of traffic in car-centric cities.
it's fascinating, too, how even the street layout itself, like a grid, can affect community.
Steve Lakeman in Portland, realizing the rigid grid in his neighborhood, felt isolating.
Leading to the intersection repair project.
Yeah, neighbors taking over a neglected intersection, painting it, adding benches, making it a real public space, a mini village square.
And it had positive psychological effects?
Apparently so. And epidemiologist Jan Semenza observed real benefits after they created that Share It Square, underscores the impact of even small, community-led changes on belonging and well-being.
So looking at the big picture, then, it feels like we made some fundamental missteps in shaping our cities.
Seems that way. We prioritize speed and separation over relationships and community.
We simplified complex systems maybe too much,
And we often let fear of the city, fear of density, fear of others guide urban development.
leading to isolation and, well, lower well-being.
That seems to be the outcome. But the encouraging part is, it's not too late. We can start rebuilding that balance by consciously prioritizing human-scale design, fostering connection in our neighborhoods and cities. Places like Commercial Drive in Vancouver show it's possible, a human speed environment where people connect.
And that final story about Schmidt's personal shift from driving everywhere to walking and running.
Yeah, it feels like a powerful symbol, doesn't it? Moving towards a more active, connected, and ultimately maybe happier way of living.
So this deep dive really hammers home that urban design isn't just about looks or efficiency.
Not at all. It has a profound, measurable impact on our happiness, our well-being.
So as you go about your day, we really encourage you to look around, take a closer look at your surroundings.
Yeah. How might the design of your own neighborhood be subtly shaping your daily life, your chances for connection?
And here's maybe a final thought to chew on. What small change in your neighborhood, maybe something overlooked, could have the biggest positive impact on community and happiness?
What has this whole discussion made you question about the design of your own city or town?
We definitely encourage you to check out the sources we use. There's a ton of fascinating research out there if you want to go deeper.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.